Thank you. We are now going to have our monthly presentation, this time discussing campus safety. And we have Dr. Chris Asmussen helping us. And please, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We will try to bring them up. If you have questions here from our live and in-person audience, go ahead and raise your hand. All right. Thank you again for being here and doing this for us. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope I stay in queue or in frame. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Chris Asmussen. I'm new to the doctorate world, so I've gone by Mr. A forever. And so Chris is great. Dr. A is great. Chris, Mr. Asmussen, I'll answer to anything. I also want to share with you that I brought my business cards for the groups that's here. And so please feel free to pick them up if you have questions afterwards, or if you want to shoot an email, please reach out to me. And also in the event that you're going back to your PTOs or to your parent organizations, we can work with your site leader if you would like me to come out and talk with your parent groups as well. I want to get that out there as well. I've been in education since 2000, 22 years, 19 years as a site-based leader at a middle school, 3 years as an assistant principal, and then 16 years as a principal in a neighboring district. And I came to Paradise Valley just this July. So when looking at school safety and what Paradise Valley Schools has been doing, I'm looking at it very similar to how parents would be looking at it. I came in with fresh eyes. And the things that I'll present today are not things that Chris Asmussen brought. These are things that PVSchools have been doing for years. So I want you to have faith in your district when we talk about these items, okay? All right, let's go. Okay, all right, so what I want to make sure that parents walk away with today is that you're able to describe the preventative measures. So we're going to start not at the end of when we're responding to something, but what are all the things that we're doing to prevent situations from happening on our campuses in the first place, and how are we supporting young people and our students? I want you to be able to describe the role of the school resource officers and our school safety officers, and how those grants are funded and how and what those grants are giving you. I want you to be able to learn all those acronyms, and it was funny when Sue said that, because it is true. We talk in a language of acronyms, and we have DIRT, and we have CERT, and we have CERP, we have PBIS, we have all these acronyms. And I'm learning them too, because some of them are specific to our district. I want you to be aware of the annual training that our staff undergo, and there are some needs in that area that I've recognized that we can do some tweaking, and that will be going to our DIRT, and I'll be talking about what all that means. And then, of course, I want our parents to walk away with what you can do to support and help school safety. A little teaser. I heard you talking that John Bowen is coming to talk to your group about PBIS, and PBIS is a framework for our schools. The great thing is that coming in, it's a district initiative. It's something that all of our schools are going to be looking at the framework of using PBIS on their campuses. Now, that also means that we have a large continuum of where each of our schools are. Some of our schools are just getting started. Some of them got a good start, and then COVID happened and they need to do a reboost. Other of our schools are far along the continuum, and they're ready to start bringing in parent and community members to be a part of their PBIS planning and their PBIS teams. All right, so PBIS, it teaches our students what the expectations are at school, and it defines it. So I grabbed Greenway, one, because of the wonderful presentation over at the board meeting last month, and two, because they're right next door. And I also got to go dance with them on their Friday or their Friday lunch. So what does ROAR stand for? It's respect, organization, attitude, responsibilities. And then defining that for our students to what does respect mean in the classroom? What does respect mean in the bathroom? That's different. What does respect mean in the common areas? What does respect mean? And I think we need to start, it might be an area as teams come together to start thinking about what does respect mean in the meta world, because that impacts our students so much in cyber and on the internet, because a lot of that does make its way back onto our campus. What does organization mean in those areas? What does attitude mean? What does responsibility mean? And it starts with our site leader, with Principal with Mr. O, Jorge, being able to use this language all the time. Then his teachers are using this language all the time. Then our students are using this language all the time. And we have a clear understanding of what the expectations are on campus. When students don't meet those expectations, we want to reteach those behaviors. We want to reteach the expectation. We want to reward students that are meeting those expectations. What we're doing is we are shaping behavior on our campuses. PBIS is data driven. So that way we're looking at our discipline data. We're looking at, some schools are using a program called SWIS, school-wide, I'm going to forget the I and the S, information. It goes to gathering data. So we're looking at minor behaviors that can be handled inside of the classroom. And then we're looking at major behavior, those types of behaviors that would result in a conduct referral and then make its way to administration to handle and work. But it's data driven. So we're looking at what are the things that we're seeing that we need to change? Are we seeing running on campus? Are we seeing defiance on campus? Are we seeing disrespect on campus? Are we seeing assault, fighting? Are we seeing drug use? What are the things that we're seeing on our campus? So we go back to our PBIS committee and we can then talk about how can we make changes in our systems to be able to support our students and changing those behaviors and decreasing those negative behaviors on campus. Multi-system tiers of support. So you get another teaser, another district-wide initiative that's happening. So the tier 1 is what we often talk about. What does everybody get? And so we can think about this in terms of academics. Everybody gets first best instruction. And if those students don't get the knowledge, they are struggling with the concepts and information, then we take a look at tier 2 supports. They still get first best instruction, but now we're layering more supports on top of that. It might be that they have individual time with the teacher. They might have some additional work to either enrich or to remediate their needs. And then if that's still enough, not enough for those students to do well, we give them a third layer of intervention. And that could be that they get specialized instruction to be able to meet their needs, either to enrich or to remediate. We do this on the behavior side as well. So in a PBIS school, everybody is getting taught what those expectations are. Everybody is being rewarded or retaught to make sure that they're meeting those expectations. Sometimes not all students are doing well with their behaviors, so we need to provide more intervention services. They might work with their counselor, and at the beginning of the day, they might check in, have a conversation about what their day looks like, encouragement to meet the expectations as the day goes on. And then at the end of the day, they might come in and check out. How did you do? That might not be enough for some students. And so maybe we need to start looking at specialized instruction for behavior and social emotional learning. So we do this systems, these tiered systems of support. Why do we want to do all of this? We want to create a school culture where our students feel connected to their school. When they feel connected to their school, they start advocating for their school. We want them to, if you see something, to say something. They are our eyes and ears. They know what's going on around our campus. They hear what somebody might have said outside of the campus. They hear what somebody might have posted. They are the ones that we need them to step forward. We have to develop a culture where our students don't feel like they're telling on their friends, but they're advocating for themselves. They're advocating for their school. All right, and we're building warm, protective, friendly environments to create that connectedness. Okay. Additionally, when we put our oxygen into things, we get more of that, all right? So if a teacher inside the classroom is stop talking, please sit down. please give, all of that. We're putting a lot of our attention into the negative behaviors. But if we say things like, well, thank you for sitting quietly. Thank you for working together as a group. Thank you for sharing your the work of your group. We get more of those behaviors. And so what we want to do is put our time and our energy into the students that are meeting those expectations that will shape others around them. And we get more and more students that are demonstrating expected school behaviors. But mostly we want to get to a school culture that if students see something, they say something. I also want to share that sometimes it's hard for students to come to us. And so I'm linking to all of our sites, our school sites have make an anonymous tip online. So if our students feel uncomfortable coming up to their teacher or their counselor or their principal at lunch duty or wherever, they have the opportunity to come in and make an anonymous tip. It truly is anonymous. We don't know where that came from, and each site has somebody designated at school to receive these emails. Thinking about seeing something and saying something. We've had situations this year where students have seen dangerous instruments on campus, weapons on campus. And although that's very scary, what is really good to celebrate is that a student saw that, got up, went and spoke with the administration right away, and then the administration was able to handle that situation. We've had students report through the anonymous tips online, and that has then cued us in that we need to do an investigation and we need to see if there's a threat to our campus.
Can I ask a quick question before
Yes.
you go on? Can parents and staff members also use that anonymous tip?
Anybody can tap into that email, and so yes, and thank you for bringing that up. Well, it depends on when that administrator checks their email, right? So it's not, but I will tell you that, we had a situation where late in the evening at a football game, the administrator happened to take a look at their phone, saw that they had a text and or an email and tapped into that right away. All right. Thinking about threats and suicide risk assessment. First off, thinking about threats. We take all threats seriously. So that means in just this last week, we've had a couple of situations pop up. One, we had an elementary school student who was upset. Their friend asked them why they were upset. And then the elementary school student, young student, not able to articulate their feelings, screamed out that when I grow up, I'm going to get a gun and I'm going to shoot people. We investigate that. Now, we also have situations where somebody will report to us that a specific student has made a specific threat against a specific individual, and they've talked about how they're going to do that. And we're going to investigate that one as well. Obviously, we're going to investigate that one. But we investigate them all from threats that were just made as flippant remarks, I'm going to kill you, to threats that over the weekend, there was a fight and an argument at the mall, and that is now trickling itself back onto our campus, and students are hearing that, and they're sharing that with our administration because they're worried that somebody might bring harm onto our campus. We work collaboratively with the law enforcement. So when we do hear of these threats, regardless of where they fall on that continuum, we notify our police officers, our school resource officers, we notify Sergeant Wilson, and then we begin to work collaboratively on how are we going to assess this threat. It might be that the school, the resource officer is going to start conducting an investigation. Maybe they go out to the home. They might have a conversation with the family, with the student, and look into, are there weapons that are at home that could potentially be brought to our campus? We're going to, I want to take a look at my notes so that I can be, I can make sure I share everything. We're going to review the records with how that student has been performing at discipline, past discipline, current academic records, living arrangements. whether or not they're under any type of treatment. We look at if they're in special education and whether or not the threat was made as a manifestation of their disability. If they are in special education, we will most likely hold a second meeting beyond a threat assessment to determine if it is a manifestation, a determination if it does manifest from their disability. We take a very deep look at that threat to see if it's a direct threat or an indirect threat, if it's veiled, if it's conditional, if there's a time frame. If the student was upset and has really no plan, that's a transient threat, or if there was something substantiated that we do believe that there might be something that happens beyond what happened today. We look at stabilizing factors at home to determine if, or stabilizing factors both at home and at school, going back to why, if there's a connectedness to their community. We look at if they belong to organizations, who the individuals were that they might be making a threat against. Very comprehensive. And then we start looking at the risk factors. Are there things that would concern us that we need to really dive deep into? Working, that could be with law enforcement as we begin that partnership. They may work separately, but we're going to be conducting that threat assessment as a school team. We will ultimately rate that threat. Is it a threat that we would consider? We have a numbering scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is it a minor threat? Is it, we don't believe that? Is it a 5? Is it very low that we don't believe that there's any risk? Or is it a 1? Is it an imminent threat to our school community? And if by chance we have something that is quite high on our risk factors, we bring in a district team now where we have 3 school psychologists that participate in helping us go deeper and further. While these things are happening, the student is not on our campus. And so I share all of these things because ultimately when we get to, it's a team process to assess. It's a team process to then determine what type of safety plan needs to be put in place to keep our campus safe. But then also we need to look at the person who's making that threat against our school and think about what type of supportive measures, what type of wraparound services do we need to provide that student so that way they don't feel the need to make a threat, that they feel safe as well. So we have to think about both sides of this. So we come up with safety plans that could include things from maybe changing schedules to doing backpack searches to developing more of a relationship with the family, to some of those things that I talked about in terms of check-ins, check-outs. So a variety of things will go into that plan, and that plan is developed and individualized to the student and to the situation. So that gets me to a lot of things are happening as soon as we find out that something has potential harm to our campus and to our students.
Schools like
Every campus,
or do you pull them from other campuses?
we can do both, but all campuses do have a school psychologist. Some are shared between 2 elementary sites as an example. But we also will tap into the nurse as a mental health professional. We tap into our counselors, our social workers, our SEL teachers, our school administration. There might be a teacher that knows the student well. So we throw that net out to figure out who we need to gather.
And what's the optimal team size to have so the school doesn't have SEL or doesn't have?
Situational, I'm going to go back to that it's situational. It very well could be that the assistant principal very much knows that child, knows that family. They've been in the school for a while. And then they may pull in the school psychologist. But I guess the other thing that I would share is that when Paradise Valley Schools has 3 district level school psychologists that act as our threat assessment leads. And so we have the resources to reach out. Administrators also will reach out to student services, and we'll talk with either Ms. Herbine or myself to seek guidance in terms of what would be some appropriate next steps if they have questions.
A question online. What is the time requirement for the threat assessment to be completed to prevent unnecessary school absence?
We do it right away. We as soon as we know, we get going. We don't delay in any way. But I do bring this up because I think parents sometimes feel that we've delayed the communication. Our goal is to get the communication out as quickly as we can, but we also have to make sure that that communication is accurate. Additionally, we want to make sure that we're communicating the right thing, because sometimes what we've heard, we can't substantiate, but there's a rumor out there, and it's important for us to share with our communities that we've heard this rumor too, and that we're looking into it, because rumors sometimes have a way of growing and swelling and getting worse than the actual situation may present. We do, so a lot of eyes on this communication. We want it to come directly from the site leader. We want their voice in that. Meanwhile, it's being looked at by our communication and marketing department, our assistant superintendents of either secondary or elementary level, and then either Laura in student services with elementary or myself. A lot of eyes are on this, and our goal is to get it out quickly. Sometimes we're delayed maybe 15, 20 minutes because it has to go through translation services so we can share it with all of our community as well. So it gets out there as quick as we can. But again, we want it to be accurate.
Just a follow-up, meaning the most important thing happening at the school at the time when you say right away is happens, like kind of, does it take priority, I guess?
Absolutely, it takes priority. And, you know, sometimes it happens right in the middle of lunch duty. So our poor site-based administrators have to figure out, how am I going to supervise lunch, still handle this, and make sure that I'm talking with all of the parties. And really, one of the most important people that we need to talk to is the student who has made the threat. Sometimes our first instinct is get them off campus, make sure that we stay safe. But really, we want to pull them in and get to what is the why did this threat take place? So we're peeling back those layers of the onion. Does that make sense? Okay. Suicide risk assessments. I want to talk a little bit about that because we do have students who make threats of harm against themselves, and we have processes and teams in place within Paradise Valley School to meet the needs of those students as well. I want to be careful with words because I don't want to cause fear, but it's important for us to know when students are thinking about self-harm, because the research would share with us that somebody who might bring harm to a school might be thinking about that as a final event. And so we want to ensure that we're meeting the needs of those students who are thinking about them harm, and we're thinking about that in terms of could they potentially bring threat to our school. Social workers, counselors, school psychologists, and nurses. In some situations, our social emotional learning teachers, our SEL teachers are also trained in mental health. So when we have a student that's presenting risk to themselves, we will have one of our mental health professionals sit in with that child to ask questions, being very direct about whether or not they are intending to bring harm to themselves, if they have a plan, if they've tried in the past. And we also have a second staff member that sits in with them during those interviews. One, we want to make sure that there's a person in the room that the child is comfortable with. And two, we want to make sure that we are recording what that student is sharing with us accurately. So one person isn't interviewing and recording at the same time. Our social workers, counselors, school psychologists, nurses, SEL teachers were all trained before school started. So we went back through, revisited these conversations about how do we properly run a threat assessment? How do we properly run a suicide risk assessment? Then in the first quarter, we made sure that all of our site leaders had an opportunity to hear and to understand what our mental health professionals talked about before school started, to really get a grasp on what the process is.
Where's the parent in all this?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So once we've gone through, once we've started initiating, so in the event of a threat assessment, we will be reaching out to parents as that process is unfolding. And likewise with a suicide risk assessment, once we've learned from a student what their intent is, or what that level of risk of harm is, we will also be reaching out to parents. So they are involved. We're not holding anything back. We need parents to be involved. And oftentimes in the event of a threat assessment, parents will share, we're experiencing challenges at home too. They are seeking help and support for their child. So we tend to get a lot of good dialogue back and forth in the creation of that homeschool team to, one, keep our campus safe, and two, to provide the supports and the wraparound services that the child needs. Thank you for asking.
The question regarding threats and cell phones. Children are able to call home before the principal even knows. How can we control, I don't know if that's the right word, but how can we be sensitive to the fact that things are moving very fast, and if it starts at 9 o'clock in the morning, my assessment of it is that we want to get in front of it. We as administration, want to get in front of it before the 5 o'clock or the 3 o'clock news, so that we don't have cars coming up to pick their kids up, and they know. How do we inform parents not to rush to judgment that things are happening beyond their control? I don't know if I've explained that.
Well, I think that really talks about the home and the school trust. And because you're right, there are times that the students have notified us, but they've already been notified through mass social media and communication, and they start reaching out at home. And parents will start calling into the school and asking questions if we're aware of it. And we might not be able to, with so many people converging at one time, that raises that level of concern at home. I'm not going to say that parents should not call the school. I'm not going to say that parents can't, they're concerned with their child. Did you want to tap into that?
I do. So I'm part of the district emergency response team, the DIRT team. And one of the things that I often do, probably ad nauseum, is say, what are parents? And I talk a lot about the need for that communication, because you get the remind things on your phone, like if there's a problem at the school. And I have asked that they say, we will update, please don't come to the school, things are under control. Like, let us know. Am I supposed to come get my kid? Am I not supposed to come get my kid? And then give us the updates, in real time, so that we know what's happening, so that as the kids are texting their parents, oh my gosh, this is happening, we can say, okay, stay where you are, stay at school, things are fine, they're handling it. It's all about those nuggets of communication that come to us as parents, because usually you're right. Like, my kid will text me, and then 5 minutes later, I get the text from the principal. And I can tell you that my experience has been good with getting that communication in real time. And as long as we as parents, follow what they're saying, whether or not to come to school or not come to school, because if there is a dismissal, it's done in an organized manner. All of the schools, I'm also on the committee, like at Horizon, where my kids are, and each school has their own plan. So the district committee says, okay, you need to come up with this plan. And then each school comes up based on their school environment and the physical environment, how they're going to dismiss students so that it is safe for everyone and happens quickly. So the communication does come out through Remind. So if you're not on Remind, you gotta.
Comment. Yeah, communication is key, but then there's certain areas of Horizon that don't get the signal, don't know Wi-Fi. Like, my daughter's 7th period, she can't. I mean, because I text her like I'm going to be late or something, and she doesn't get it. She says there is no Wi-Fi, and that's a big deal. I mean, if you're in a certain area of campus in a class that you get no communications, what if something bad happens? Then, I mean, how can they contact the teacher? How can they,
But that happens in all of our campuses. They all have sections of the campus that, due to the metal in that building, that it blocks it out. The Crest building is the same way at PD High School.
Okay.
There are certain buildings on each campus that are it's not intentional, but it happens.
And
to be Wi-Fi
we'll
signals.
talk about informing and maybe some things that might be process improvement to ensuring that our students are aware. But what I'm hearing is that that getting as many text messages and information out in real time is something that the communication marketing department, along with student services, needs to keep their eye on. Because we know that in a lack of information, that our minds start to go.
Just to add on to that too, one thing that I found this year is that, a recommendation is that the students also receive the district
Mhm.
communication at the same time while the parents are, because I found that, I've received communication, my son hasn't, and he's like, we have no idea what's going on, and, if at least the high school, students with the cell phones get the communication, then, okay, now we're all kind of on the same page. So
Yeah,
what's
great
going on is
recommendation.
that we know it, we're.
Mhm.
agree with that. I can see the experience being in the situation and advocate for social workers, counselors, school psychologists, nurses, and our SEL team, as well as our teacher coaches. They're on the ground. And so, we're talking about students texting their parents, oh my gosh, this is happening, like this is stressful. But when you have a healthy adult in one of these positions and we are there with the kids, we're able to say, hey, I know you're texting mom. I can't prevent you from doing that. Just tell her you're with me and tell her you're okay. And then that spreads because they're not only you guys texting you or us as parents, we're texting each other. So they're able to say like, hey, such and such, where they say everything's okay. And then it just spreads because really at the end of the day, this team, this system, I feel like we're well trained. We can speak from that side. As parents, having had situations happen in my children's school, I, felt absolutely, but I felt absolutely safe because I knew that SEL person was there. I knew social worker was there. I knew principal was there. All of those people were there and they were going to make sure that my children.
And systems are in place.
Exactly. So I'm going to advocate for as many hands as we can on the ground, right? Not just in their offices. They need to be out and moving around.
Yep.
So
I love that though, to text the parents back and say, the SEL is here and I'm okay.
because
That's
we do,
important.
when
Right.
something major happens, we know to take, the kids and stuff like that. So
There was a question that had popped up before about, do we work with a company just to take a look at the physical structures of our campuses? What we do is we complete what's called a threat vulnerability assessment, and that's actually done by a trained police officer. And we're blessed because a couple of our school resource officers have been trained to be able to conduct a threat vulnerability assessment. They're recommended to be done every 5 years. We're working directly with Detective Stebbins with the Phoenix Police Department, who's with the Homeland Security Department, and he is the one that schedules the officers to come out. They work directly with the site leader, so that way it's really about a 2.5-2-hour process where the officer is going to talk with the site leader about concerns, about maybe new things that have been added, what does staffing look like, what does the use of the building look like, and then they go actually and do a physical walk and take a look at each area of the building and then come back and debrief. The principal will also do an online survey where data is gathered, and then a full report is done, and that report is ultimately uploaded to a shared information platform with the Phoenix Police Department. This is also true with Scottsdale. I know that we fall under 2 jurisdictions. Right now we do fall within that 5 years with our sites. However, we're on the back end of that. And so it is time to start doing more threat vulnerability assessments on our campuses. We did 2 of them before the start of the school year at Sky Crossing because it was the new build. And we did one right over here at Palomino Primary because they underwent a renovation. But it is our goal, Detective Stebbins, myself, to get all of our schools through another threat vulnerability assessment by the end of this coming summer. So we can do them on the breaks. And some of our principals and site leaders have already started to say that they're willing to come in over a winter break or a spring break to get their assessments done before the summertime hits. A great relationship between PVSchools and the Phoenix Police or the Phoenix Police Department, because Detective Stebbins needs to do this for all schools across Phoenix with a limited number, but he's made the commitment to us to be able to get those done sooner than later. We had an inquiry from ABC 15 to talk about what has our district done in the last 5 years with regard to school safety. And so part of that, we were able to pull, I asked facilities, how much has been spent from the bond project since 2017. And if you are doing math in your head, I actually did it. It's just under $13.5 million has been spent in upgrading fencing, cameras, front offices, and making sure that our campuses, have an infrastructure of safety.
So thank you for people who vote yes for PV students and volunteers. Coming soon, next election.
And you do see a major dip in 2021 due to COVID. We also are investing, and we have a school safety program. It's called the Continuation Grant. First, this grant is for our school resource officers or juvenile probation officers, but there's a caveat. We're going to change that. The state is changing that. It's competitive, so it's a 3-year cycle. In January, the application will come out that we need to reapply for these funds. And so school districts all over the state of Arizona are going to be applying for this grant. Phoenix has, PVSchools has done a great job in the last grant cycle because you can see how many school resource officers we have. I'm noting a couple that are in red, and I want to be open, transparent, and share. The staffing crisis for our Phoenix Police Department is real also. So this last summer at Vista Verde Middle School and during this academic year at Pinnacle High School, we had 2 officers retire. At Vista Verde, Sergeant Wilson was able to post for that vacancy, was able to interview for that vacancy, has selected somebody for that vacancy. And right now, that person has not been pulled off of patrol to be able to come to our school to support us because of the staffing shortages that is taking place in the Phoenix Police Department. And so that also occurred in the middle of the first quarter, when the officer at Pinnacle retired. There were several schools and districts that gave money back to the state, and the state also came up with additional funding for school resource officers. So there were new schools this last summer that were awarded school resource officers at Pinnacle Peak Prep, and at Indian Bend over the summer. We were awarded the funding to be able to get a school resource officer into those schools. We have to be able to hire an officer by January 1st. And the challenge that we're experiencing is that they have a shortage of police officers. And so we have 2 more schools that are going vacant right now because of that.
Good question
Yeah.
on that slide. It looks like some schools share a resource
Mhm.
officer and some have dedicated resource officers. So like, in the meantime, can Eagle Ridge share with Indian Bend or something? How do you determine who gets a dedicated resource officer versus share?
So each of these schools, and so Boulder Creek and Quail Run, they applied for the grant together. And so that's how they ended up sharing. And so they made the choice to apply as a joint school process. With the school resource officers, there are some requirements. One is that they have to spend 80% of their time on their campus. So we can't just pull and move them. The other part about that too is that the role of the school resource officer is to develop relationships with kids and then also to provide law-related education. So we don't have much flexibility with moving these officers around.
So when they please correct me if I'm misremembering this, but so these the grant is through the Arizona Department of Education, correct? And so the application would be done at the site level. The site leadership at that school would decide, yes, we want an SRO. This seems appropriate. We're going to apply. And so that's how you, right? You would have site leadership at Campobello and Sunset Canyon.
Right.
Okay, we'd have
So
a
just over
conversation.
3 years ago, they made those decisions.
So they're site-based decisions, and then they probably, I would imagine, get some sort of support from the district, but it's their application at the site level.
Right.
Okay.
I'll come back. Please ask that question again, because I want to remember to talk about it. We also have a different type of school resource officer on some of our campus, and these are called school safety officers. And the district is providing funding, or the site is providing funding for those individuals. So Officer Pilling is our district-wide school resource officer housed at Sweetwater Community School and spending time right now at Vista Verde as well, because we know that there's high levels of need up there, especially in building those relationships with an adult mentor for our kids. Horizon High School uses a rotation of off-duty officers. Pinnacle Peak has an off-duty officer as well, and then they're all under Sergeant Wilson. I don't believe we're paying Sergeant Wilson. He's on his own. But again, I want to talk to, now these officers, we have a little bit more flexibility with, and specifically with Officer Pilling, that we can pull and move him around because he's not tied to a single school. That's important if a school resource officer happens to be out, or a school doesn't have a school resource officer, but they need a police officer. It's always good to be able to call somebody that has experience with children, has experience inside of the schools, because they're going to approach the situation differently than just the beat cop that is out there supporting the neighborhood. And we have yet another grant for school safety program, and this is under ESSER funding. And this grant is providing counselors and social workers on our campuses. And you can see what schools have applied to have either a social worker or a counselor. This grant is coming to an end on June 30th of next year. And you can also see that we're experiencing staffing shortages, that we had a school that was awarded but was unable to hire by the date that we needed to have that. Coming back to your question now. So the school safety grant, the continuation, originally was for probationary, juvenile probation officers or school resource officers. And now we are able to, the school can make a decision if they'd like to apply for a social worker or a counselor. So the school can make a determination of which of those awarded positions would best suit the needs of their school. So we'll be going through that grant application process starting in January. We've already begun to think about how did we apply in the last cycle? What were the responses that schools provided to the questions that were successful? And we will be, that's my role at the district office, is to look at those as exemplar responses and start pulling together how our sites can have successful grant writing. We'll also bring all of the site leaders together so we can collaborate in our application process. That was done just over 3 years ago, and that was successful in getting the huge number of school resource officers that you saw.
Oh, so just to clarify if I understood this correctly, so it's school who doesn't necessarily request an SRO can use that same grant to apply to get a social worker.
So we have, like, let's take Desert Shadows Elementary as an example. The grant for their social worker is coming to an end. But they can now apply for the continuation grant and make a request to maintain their social work. The difference is going to be, again, is that continuation grant is competitive. So we have to do a really good job with our application process.
Does that mean there's only a certain number that's given per district, per state?
For the state,
For the whole state?
right.
And honestly, folks, you need to understand that our district is very successful at this. And this is what makes, sadly, the difference between our school districts and the programs across this state. So, it's not just that we can pass our M&O and our bonds. But it's that we have staff that understand how to apply and win at grants over and over and over again. Whereas other districts do not have that ability.
That was my question, and I know this is going back before you were with PV, so, but I was just curious if you had a sense of how many sites within PV applied for either an SRO or a social worker counselor through that ADE grant program and did not get it.
Well, we know that some didn't get it
Right.
because they were, when a second award process came through. And I know that, as an example, North Canyon came in the second year of the grant. And then here in this third year, Indian Bend and Pinnacle Peak Prep were awarded. I don't know the total number
Okay.
of who applied and who didn't get. I do know that our success rate was very high.
Yeah, I mean, it looks to be just from what you're sharing today, yeah.
And I know I had seen your hand up.
So school funding doesn't automatically include having a counselor or a psychologist or on campus. You have to write a special grant to get that.
No. We do have some. But these are programs that the state offers schools to apply for.
Okay.
So it's.
And get additional.
To supplement the deplorable funding.
Well, because I'm reading here, it says, the American School Counselor Association recommends 250 to 1 counselors to student ratio. And Arizona ranks absolutely last.
Okay, but
716 students for one counselor.
But
And then
Right.
have to share.
understand though, those counselors are not these counselors. So you're mixing terms.
Well,
Yes.
it
The
says,
counselor you're talking about are high school type counselors who are helping with programming, academics. These counselors are helping with social and emotional elements. They're different terminologies, just so you know.
They're both called counselors.
They are.
yeah, I
Different
understand.
I just want to make sure you know that those numbers,
Yeah.
because our high schools are at 600 to 1.
It's better than the state average right now.
Right.
But the state does not fund
They don't
that,
fund it.
they don't fund it at the rate that they, in order to meet anything close to the recommendation.
Last.
Yeah, well.
I'm with you. They're voters.
Do all student resource officers carry weapons?
Yes.
Because
By
they're police.
definition, to be a resource officer, you have to have a weapon.
No, not by definition, but they're coming to us from the local law enforcement agency. And the only people that are allowed to carry weapons on our campus are those that are in law enforcement.
I guess I'm wondering, do they need to have weapons on our campus?
They're active duty
Yes.
officers.
What about the off-duty?
So
Yes.
they're
They're-
not that
I mean,
Right.
They're still officers.
active duty. They're police officers.
And they
Off-duty officers
do
get paid.
SROs have to have weapons? Can they do their job without pulling their weapon?
that would be a question that I would need to ask Sergeant Wilson. Because although they are on our campuses and we have a relationship with them, they are still the Phoenix police officer or the Scotts. If we were able to, the 3 schools that fall within the Scottsdale jurisdiction, if they had a school resource officer, they would fall under the Scottsdale Police Department.
So-
So that's a question I need to ask their sergeant, and then I can bring that back.
So just so folks understand, these officers start the day at the Phoenix or Scottsdale Police Department. They check in, then they drive to their school. They are literally active police officers.
Correct.
With weapons.
Would they get
They-
called away for a reason, like if there was something?
They could. That's not the goal, though. Remember, they have a commitment and we have an agreement with the Phoenix Police Department, with the city of Phoenix, that what their role is.
And for they're off-duty officers.
That is why they're-
Male versus female are mostly SROs males.
I'd have to do the research on that. I haven't looked into that. We do have some female school resource officers, but as I'm ticking through, I think the percentage would lean male. I could get exact numbers for you, though.
Where I'm going with this is that throughout the country, we're talking about police and funding for police departments. And are the resources going for policemen that are carrying guns, or are there police officers or social workers that are working problems and issues on the street. Should we be looking at that type of a person to be an SRO and maybe change the word, get the O out of there, and be able to utilize that type of a resource?
Maybe a little bit beyond my scope, but I do want to talk about that the site is going to be, as they go through the application process, they're going to be assessing the needs of their campus. So they can then make the determination if it's best to have a social worker or a counselor in lieu of a school resource officer. So it really is data driven. And part of the requirements are that they have a school safety team that includes the school resource officer where they're meeting at least on a quarterly basis. It's recommended to meet monthly to review the data to then be able to make changes to ensure that the frameworks and the systems that they have in place at the school are best meeting and supporting the needs of the students they serve.
But the parents need to be educated about what they're doing so that they don't have a false sense of security by virtue of saying it's an officer when they can really be doing the same job that that person was doing without carrying a weapon.
All right, before I make the switch into, okay, we've been talking a lot about the preventative side and the systems and the frameworks that we have in place to support our kids. And so why is all of this important? Thinking about the off-ramp project and the violence project, what we know about people who are active shooters that come to either businesses or to schools. The off-ramp and violence project are suggesting that we focus on preventative measures, thinking about building crisis response teams, training our staff on crisis intervention, thinking of suicide prevention not as punishment, looking for signs of leakage. And what they mean by that is somebody who might be disclosing that they intend to bring harm before they bring it, so that we were listening and we have situational awareness for that. Putting reporting mechanisms in place, taking all threats seriously, using a team approach. And then the Violence Project and Off-Ramp are suggesting that this is how you keep your school safe. Promote a safe school climate, establish crisis response teams, identify resources, define concerning behaviors, put reporting mechanisms in place, train your stakeholders, and plan for communication strategies. So I got the opportunity to look at this with new eyes. And that's why I feel that, PVSchools has really a lot of structures, frameworks already in place before I came in July. So now let's talk about DIRT, which is what I thought we were talking about the first time I heard that word. So we have our district emergency response team, our school emergency response teams, and our school emergency response plans. So now we start thinking about, well, what if something happens? How do we manage that? All right. So in our district emergency response team, we have district directors that are there, our community education, facilities, information technology, marketing, nursing, myself, nutrition and wellness. We have the Phoenix Police Department as part of that team. We have teachers as part of that team, parents as part of that team, site level administrators as part of that team, community members as a part of that team. Laura, do you want to talk at all about this process? Since you're there, yeah, my timing was great. Finish. And I did want to share, we happen to have a meeting that's coming up this coming Friday. So why not share what the agenda is? What are we going to talk about? So we're talking about those protective measures and a comprehensive approach to school safety. So we can understand what our threat assessment, suicide risk assessment looks like. I'll be presenting that with Suzanne Ote, who's our lead psychologist. And Alice upstate, over the summer, we 9 members of our district participated in active shooter response training that was provided by the Phoenix Police Department. Reached out to us to make us aware of this training. It was funded by the Firefighters Association. And then we happened to be a host district, so we were able to have 9 seats at that training. So we shared what Alice looked like, options-based responses in the event that we have an active shooter. And so we want to have a conversation with our district emergency response team to talk about where are we going now. Now that we've had these next steps, we talked a little bit with our community or with our DIRT team about this is what we did, how comfortable do we feel moving forward? And now we have to share what does moving forward look like. We want to talk about some commercial barricading products, as that conversation is coming up at our sites. And then we want to talk about our visitor and school access discussion as well, because we are inviting places. We are, you know, we're not trying to keep people out of our schools. We're trying to bring and build community within our schools. And schools are often the centerpiece of our neighborhoods. Yet, so we have this concern about safety. We also want to be warm and inviting to our community. So we're going to have that conversation, talk about our process and procedures and some new policy that has come out from new legislation. And then finally, we're going to do a call for a design team. I'll talk about this toward the end of the presentation in terms of some of our critical thinking or our tabletop discussions that we ask our sites to go through.
So, as a parent on this committee, I try to be our voice collectively, in thinking about, you know, just all of the variables that we have amongst us, from Title I schools, from single parent families in terms of emergencies. Not everybody can leave in the middle of the day to go pick up their kid if there's an emergency, right? Just all the different things that we have going on. But one of the things that I want to say is, as a parent, one of the best things that we can do for our kids is to have discussions with them about the drills that they do at school, the fire drills, the bomb threats, the intruder on campus. My daughter, on her first day of middle school, we were driving to school and she looked at me and said, you know, Mom, now that I'm going to be in middle school, there's a higher chance that I'm going to have an intruder on campus. Well, my heart dropped to my toes. And I took a deep breath and I said, yep, you're right. So tell me what you know. And for the next 5 minutes, she went through all of the things that she has learned, from hide under your desk, go into a closet, make sure your cell phone is silenced, put your backpack on the front if you're being told to go, like all of the things. And I was like, wow, you are really prepared. That's great. And she was like, yeah, I am. And so we took something that was, you know, scary. Obviously, she was thinking about this, right? Because she brought it up. And we turned it into an empowering moment. And I think that for us as parents, that's important. Like, hey, kiddo, you know what? You know what to do, right? And you've got teachers and staff and social workers and SEL folks all at school that are going to help you navigate these situations. So don't be afraid to have the conversations with your kids. You know, when you know that there's a fire drill or some kind of drill that happened at school, talk to them about it, ask them about it, you know, ask questions, find out information, go back to your administration at school and say, hey, I'm just curious, what's the process for picking up my kid if there is an emergency? Then you'll know what that process is and how to navigate those situations.
Thank you. So great to have all of these folks a part of it, because, and this isn't one for our schools. I just pulled this off the internet, but the incident command system is very important. So with having our district directors a part of this process and a part of our district emergency response team, there are several people that have to be engaged. If we lose electricity at Shadow Mountain, which has happened a couple times this year, then we have to begin thinking, what does transportation need to do? What's their role? What about nutritional services and getting water to that campus? Well, you know, there just could be so many different people that need to be engaged. How is communication, marketing? How are we getting the word out to our parents if we have to do something different because we lost electricity? Or if there was an emergency on campus. So what the emergency or this incident command system does is it creates responsibilities, and individuals become accountable to their roles. It creates communication systems that are in place. It's flexible, and incident command can start off with the site-based leader and then be turned over to the emergency responders that are there. So this command structure is something that we all have to be trained in, because when we make the transition over to the site emergency response team, they're responsible for the execution of their plan, And that means that they're responsible for that incident command and becoming those section chiefs. So they're the ones that are planning, I'll talk about the plan in just a moment. But who is responsible for what? Who's going to be in charge of safety? Who's going to be in charge of making communication? Who's going to be in charge of logistics? Who's going to be in charge of setting up staging areas if we need to do something like that? The emergency response team is responsible for training their staff at their site, and they're responsible for their drills. And then if an event does happen, microwave goes off. We've been cooking popcorn, the fire alarm just magically goes off in the middle of the day, and now we all exit. That's a great time for us to come back as an emergency response team to talk about what went well and what didn't go well. Were we able to account for our students quickly? Where were the hiccups? Was there a gate that somebody didn't have a key to, and that created a log jam? So we can have those discussions. And then there's also, so we always want to be talking about process improvement. The emergency response plans. It's our incident command structure. So that's where at the site, and it's not always the principal that acts as the incident commander. It oftentimes is, but does not have to be. They identify their staging areas. They look at offsite relocation. The threat vulnerability assessment does live inside of the emergency response plan, but remember that once this plan is done, it's uploaded and it's electronic in nature. Site maps are there, protocols for 30 potential hazards. What do you do if a swarm of bees comes onto campus and the queen just happens to leave right by the bus gate and the swarm comes around, right? So they'll talk about those kinds of things, as well as what happens if we have an intruder on our campus. And then documentation of the ICS training, these members have to go through the ICS 100 course.
So is it the principal that decides the command structure, like starts with the principal of that school?
It starts with that team. It starts, so the principal could very well be leading and facilitating this team, but it is this team that updates the emergency response plan annually.
Because you know what happened at Uvalde? It was like everyone's blaming each other. It was like there were the school officers that said they were supposed to be responsible. And then they said, no, it was the police that's supposed to be responsible. I mean, so does everybody know who's supposed to be responsible when they get there? I mean, you may know, but I mean, does everybody else know?
Well, I mean, so as first responders are coming on campus, they may not know, but what's going to be happening is that whoever is leading that crisis will then relinquish incident command. And as part of that giving up of incident command, they need to bring on those first responders and tell them what's been going on, who's responsible for what, that I've got this area covered. We have, so that is part of the training for that our staff on these teams need to go
I know,
through.
but your staff gets it, but I mean, if the first responders are like the fire people.
The incident command structure is the same structure that is used with police, fire. It actually comes out of FEMA.
So it's the same thing at every school?
Mhm.
Okay.
And we do drills at the school, and all of the schools have, the notebook that you can go in and talk to them and see. Chuck is our person at Horizon. And they talk through scenarios all the time. We debrief, that team debriefs anytime there's an incident on campus. And then there's also other outlying things, like if you have students or staff members that aren't mobile, who's going to specifically help those people?
Mhm.
And, so it's a whole thing.
So as part of that is a great example, maybe you're identifying a world language teacher that would be their role in an emergency is to support with communication until translators can get on campus. So those kinds of things are being identified. Thinking about staff training and specific to emergency response, we have some live training can take place at sites. We also have what's called vector training, and this is an annual training that all of our employees are to go through. They can test out because they may have been with our district for several years and they've been through this training several times. We're going to talk about maybe a crosswalk that's coming, but we talk about what to do in the event of an active shooter. It's described that we would go into a lockdown or an emergency lockdown. We do, through this training, we do empower our staff to think of the best response. And it could be run, it could be hide, and it could be to to engage, only if that's the last resort. We don't want, but so we go through these types of trainings with our staff. I want to jump ahead to when we get to a crosswalk. So drills in practice, we talk about lockdown and emergency lockdown drills. A lockdown, you can think of that more of a shelter in place. So maybe something's happening outside in the community, but we want to go into a lockdown. Teaching and learning can continue, but we don't want to really have kids maybe moving out on campus because there's something happening. An emergency lockdown is called when there is something on our campus and we need to be aware of. Fire and evacuation drills, and then reverse evacuation drills. I want to talk about something that's coming up because I know that thinking of Uvalde, and I saw that question pop up. Thinking about what our current practices are and maybe some things for DIRT, so we can think about how our district team will provide guidance to the site teams. And begin thinking about maybe some things we want to consider. One is that our annual active shooter preparedness training is done through a video and through Safe Schools. Do we want to consider doing that as a live training where it's whole group, that we make sure that we have a check for understanding? That's a nice term for a quiz at the end. Emphasis being placed on situational awareness. And when we think of situational awareness, we have to, if we hear that noise, maybe not immediately think, is that just a car or a balloon, but being able to think that this could be happening. Let's not dismiss it. Let's be listening for other sounds and hearing other things. Situational awareness is also about knowing where your exits are and where they go. Where does that door go? Does it lead outside to a playground? And if it does lead outside to the playground, are there ways to get off the playground so we can fully evacuate? Looking at an emergency lockdown right now, we talk about that being called by the incident commander, and we say this is an emergency lockdown. We might want to consider thinking about anybody can call an emergency lockdown, and we can get specific about that information and giving more information to our students and to our teachers. So if something was happening on the far side of campus and a teacher over here on the opposite end of campus knows about that, perhaps their best response is to leave and to give distance between them and a threat versus hiding and waiting for something. But now, and we do talk about this, but now let's get a little bit more explicit about it. Thinking about in our videos and our trainings, barricade is something that's described. Maybe we need to demonstrate. So these kinds of things are the things that we'll be talking about in DIRT to then offer guidance to our school emergency response teams so that way they can put this into their school trainings. Again, training on the protective measures right now. I think it's very important for all of our, stepping backwards. Emergency lockdown drills right now are about, as described, being quiet in the room, finding a place to hide, taking care of ourselves that way. But maybe what we need to do is during those lockdown drills, we also incorporate in having the conversation, eyes on teacher, follow the direction of your teacher. Thinking about, okay, if we had to leave this room in a drill, right? Now we can talk about evacuation drills and making sure that our students know where doors go as well. So that way if they need to evacuate, they can. Training those proactive measures along with emergency response planning. And then we also have the opportunity, because we've been trained by Alice, this active shooter, we can now maybe present that. Am I running out of time? Oh, okay.
If anybody needs to leave, please feel free to go. But everything you are saying with us has been.
And this is
fantastic.
literally the last slide. I promise. But there was a lot, and I knew that there was a lot of concern, so I wanted to give you very comprehensive. Finally, tabletop exercises. So during Q2 and Q4, our district emergency response team develops and provides to the school emergency response teams tabletop exercises. These are designed to have that thought experiment, designed to get that team thinking about how would I put the incident command structure into place. And so they have included in the past intruders, power outages, natural disasters, what happens if an entire city block goes without electricity, those kinds of things. I wanted to share with this group what did we just have them do? So this is the rules, understanding that this is, this is not a test, we want you thinking as a group. So this last one that came out in the second quarter, we have a student and they're gonna make it specific to their school, the grade level, was recently expelled. They were determined to be a level 1 threat. So we talked about that high level of threat, carrying out violence. Law enforcement was notified. And so let's start thinking about what would happen if 5 weeks after the incident or after the student, they came onto campus, right in the middle of a faculty meeting. So your kids are gone, but you still have maybe some students that are left, that are on campus for sports or clubs. So then we start asking our administrators, what are the immediate actions that you're going to take? What are your initial concerns when you're receiving this information? And then we throw at them another twist that they were seeing going into a teacher's classroom, right? And so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I want to just get you the idea that after that second twist, we give them more questions to think about. And then we throw another twist at them and we get them thinking more about other questions. And so that process continues. And so for the second quarter, our school emergency response teams went through this scenario. So how would I not just have this emergency response plan that's sitting on the shelf, but how do I use that emergency response plan? And what are some of the actions I would be taking?
Does everybody, like all the teachers, all staff, anybody that's on campus need to know what the plan is?
Well,
Or is it just the group of people
that emergency response team, we're asking them to have that thinking exercise. Site leaders may weave that out into their faculty meetings. They might weave that out into their safety plans or their safety
Because if
committees.
something like that happens, then the principal's not at school because he's gone for the day or she's gone for the day. And the team is not at school. So who's going to handle this person walking around?
And so in that incident command structure, you have who your incident commander is, then you have the next person in line. So that is all mapped out for the school.
But those people are at school.
Right. So I hear what you're saying, that a classroom teacher may not be fully aware, which brings up a really good point. Inside of all of our classrooms, we have emergency flip charts.
Okay.
So that way, if something happens, they can directly go right over by the wall, pull that emergency flip chart off and say, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do in this situation. A lot of those resources, again, have been really thought through by Dr. Von Echten before me, by Drew Davis before him, by, I keep hearing referred to as Little Jim Lee. So, I mean, really, just great structures and frameworks that have been put in place. And I think, as community, as parents, please know that we can't predict everything that's going to happen in any course of the day, just like if students were to go to the mall or if your children were at the movie theater. But boy, we've put a lot of time and energy thinking about it on how we would respond to ensure that our kids are safe.
You had mentioned that if any of our parent group leaders want you to come to their campus and do a version of this or answer site-specific questions, they can reach out to you and your business cards are right over there.
Absolutely. And of course, we would work directly with the site leader,
Yes.
making sure that the site leader is involved.
And the other last question that I have for you before we release all of these lovely people, if a parent wants to get involved in any of the planning, any of the abilities to be in the planning stages of this, how would they do that?
Reach out to your site leaders, reach out to your principals. Your PTOs are already got such a great relationship with those schools. Now we can just, we just have to have the conversation. We have to be willing to have it. So I would reach out to them. United Parent Council has members that are on our DIRT team. So working through United Parent Council. And of course, if you have the question, ask it. So my business card is out there. Don't hesitate to call. Lots of people do. And I know that when I set people, if we can have that conversation, it sets people at ease.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Sorry, I went long.
We started late.
One of those days.
to talk about.
A lot. All right, we're off now? No.
Remind us what is, we have no meeting in December,
We
right?
have no meeting in December.
So enjoy your,
So enjoy your time. January is tentatively scheduled as we are working it out, but we are hoping it is going to be a meeting where we are discussing some of the additional resources we have on campuses for helping with social emotional issues and with our students and counseling.
Thank
But we will see. Hold on. We don't know yet.
stay tuned.
Yeah, we're gonna see everyone tomorrow.
Bye, everybody online. Thank you.